Prologue. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. The world is relative. The central continent and the great western island are separated from each other by the ocean, but they are distantly opposite of each other. The east has a high altitude, so it seems the sky is also higher. There the clouds rise up from the sea to dry land, without stopping they float endlessly. In the end they gather together, in the entire year they will not scatter. This is the tomb of clouds, the grave of all clouds in the world. In the innermost depths of the tomb of clouds sits a lonely mountain. The summit leads to the endless sky, no one knows where it goes. Tales say the world is made up of 5 continents. Each continent has its own different landscapes. Only those who possess the lifespans of immortals can see all the different landscapes. To normal people, the tales are tales. They do not know where the other continents are, do not know how to reach them, do not know that the lonely mountain within Tomb of Clouds leads to the path to the other continents. Naturally, there is also nobody that has seen the scenery high above the clouds. Here, the serene clouds are like white silk spreading out in all directions, seemingly without end. Above the endless sky mirror is black endless abyss, inside are countless number of stars. Suddenly, 2 stars light up, getting brighter and brighter, they quickly reach the sky mirror. When those 2 stars arrive before the mirror, it becomes clear that they are not stars but 2 balls of holy fire. On this mirror surface that separates the real world from the abyss appeared a spider web of cracks, but in a moment it was restored. Those 2 balls of flame, through some magical means, appeared on the other side of the mirror surface in the real world. In the thin atmosphere, the 2 flames burned incessantly, warping the air and causing it constantly change shape. Those are not balls of flame, but eyes. The entire world, because of this grand descent, is in an uproar. Light is constantly being reflected, on the surface of the clouds appeared a long shadow like a mountain. The space began to warp, as if it was about to break. A great golden dragon emerged from within the clouds. The distant sun was completely obscured by its enormous body. The entire world above the clouds consequently grew dim, all around the air rapidly grew colder, and ice began to crystallize in the clouds. The countless rays of light became strange flickers on the crystal surface. Heaven and earth changed colors. Truly this dragon was an awe-inspiring existence. The great golden dragon looked down upon the world, its eyes indifferent. The view above the clouds, it had already seen many times. The dragon flew towards the lonely mountain on the horizon. As it approached, its terrifying dragon body submerged itself into the cloudy abyss, completely vanishing from sight. The endless quantities of fog were cut open by that terrifying dragon's body. The crags and cliffs of the lonely mountain are extremely precipitous, no plants grew there, not even moss. The deathly stillness made it seem like a tomb. Just like this the dragon flew through the foggy abyss. Many days and nights passed. Who knows how far it had flown, but it had never left the fog. It met no other beings, but one could faintly see that on the mountain crags appeared moss. The fog had also grown thicker, or perhaps the pressure it gave off was the cause. The fog began to change shape into many crystals. These water droplets also made the air moister. The dragon bore these transformations with no interest, continuing to fly downward. The plant life within the lonely mountain gradually grew more and more abundant, the air moister, the water drops pooled in the cliffs gradually became countless thin, leaf-sized streams. These countless thin streams of water flowed down the cliffs into the fog. As the golden dragon gazed upon these countless streams of water, the look within its eyes became more concentrated, the 2 divine flames grew more serene. This place was the Tomb of Clouds, but it was also the source of all water. Of these countless streams falling from the lonely mountain, the dragon chose one. The golden dragon flew silently along this single waterway, flying countless days and night, almost as if it would repeat again, until suddenly the fog in front of him scattered. Before the fog was the earth. The bottom of the clouds was flat and smooth, calmly rising and falling in accordance with the ground. perfectly protecting the space between the clouds and the earth was 5 feet of distance. Coincidentally, this was the height of the average man, as if the Creator himself had fashioned this space. This space that was 5 feet tall, the surface seemed to go on endlessly, with faint rays of light, but no sun to be seen. On the surface flowed countless streams of water. The fog dissipated on the dragon's body, revealing a small stream. This small stream originated from the moist dew of the lonely mountain. Clear, tranquil, and cold, in the stream there was a wooden basin, in the basin were several layers of cloth, on the cloth was an infant, the infant's complexion was blue, eyes closed, it was clear that it had just been born and not too long ago. The mist over the stream was like the blossoms of a flower, opening countless thousands of petals, clustering, rushing, scattering, making a chi-chi noise. Then a golden dragon even larger than a palace slowly emerged from the mist and made its way to the riverside. The 5-foot space between the mists and the river was quite narrow to the dragon. The golden dragon's physique was hidden within the mists, part of its head was also hidden within the mists. It made the dragon seem all the more majestic, mysterious, terrifying. The golden dragon quietly waited by the riverside. The wooden basin floated on the water, bobbing up and down. In this insignificant wooden basin was this abandoned, eyes closed, blue-faced, newly born infant. The fog gradually scattered, everything returned its serene and tranquil state. However, this peace was only temporary. That I in the deepest depths of the mist, all the way till the lonely mountain, all at once there were countless mournful sounds, panic-stricken whistling and howling. In this seemingly lifeless world, there was in reality many birds and beasts. Everywhere within the fog was the sound of many flapping wings. There was also the sound as if a unicorn was heedlessly destroying countless tens of thousands of trees in its rush to escape. There was even the extremely brilliant cry of a phoenix. A string of divine and intangible fire emerged from the riverside and spread to the horizon. The moist grass suddenly became incomparably dry, even the plants within the water suddenly curled up. The golden dragon remained expressionless, noble, and apathetic, lord of all under heaven. All the beasts in the world under the clouds all fled, the dragon paid no attention to it. Even if the phoenix fled, the dragon paid no attention to it. The dragon only stared at the small stream, stared at the wooden basin floating on the stream. From the lonely mountain fell tens of thousands of little streams, but the dragon looked at only this particular stream. After 30,000 years, the dragon only descended to this world for this infant in the wooden basin, who could shift its gaze. A very thin piece of silk slowly fell. This piece of silk was golden on the outside, on the inside it was a divine pure white, it seemed as if it was giving off its own light. The front of the piece of silk was very thin, but gradually grew thicker towards the end until it grew as thick as an arm. The surface of the silk was perfectly smooth. It seemed to penetrate the depths of the cloudy abyss, making it even more beautiful. This piece of silk seemed to be made of gold or jade, giving off a very heavy feeling. But in fact it was very light, swaying with the breeze from the brook, as if it were dancing, wanting to touch that wooden basin, only to again draw back. It was the golden dragon's whisker. Now, the divine fire within the golden dragon's eyes was no longer in that eternally calm state, the eyes had gone from apathetic to pondering, as if hesitating over something. The 2 dragon whiskers, like 2 soft fingers, lightly touched the edge of the wooden basin floating on the river, as if gently stroking it, but in reality not touching it at all. This golden dragon had already lived countless years, possessed unimaginable knowledge, yet this simple wooden basin presented to it an unsolvable problem. The mood within the dragon's eyes became more and more complex. There was longing, vigilance, hesitation, and finally, struggle, perhaps unintentional, perhaps intentional. A slight change in the breeze, the edge of the wooden basin that should have touched the dragon's whiskers swept past, until finally the whiskers were able to touch the wooden basin for the first time, even brushing the infant's ear. This light touch brought about a violent reaction, the 2 divine fires within the golden dragon's eyes suddenly exploded, becoming a myriad of stars. Within that ocean of stars came an undisguised callous and greedy desire. This desire, it was praiseworthy, it was moving. It praised life, it was moved by life. It was life's most primal longing. The golden dragon, gazing at the wooden basin, opened its mouth, dragon's breath like broken jade poured out. The infant's eyes were still closed, it simply did not know what would happen in the next moment. A shadow enveloped the stream. Dragon's breath surrounded the wooden basin on all sides. In the next moment, the wooden basin and the infant within would become the golden dragon's food. At this moment, a hand was put on the edge of the wooden basin, pulling it out of the river. This was a hand covered with scars, thin, weak, and small. Hua hua, the water's surface was broken. That pair of hands pulled the wooden basin and ran to the creek edge. The owner of that hand was a 3 or 4-year-old Taoist boy. The boy pulled the basin to the stream edge and hid it between a stone and his own body, then drew a sword from his belt and turned to look at the terrifying, enormous golden dragon's head. This was a very strange boy. He was blind in one eye, missing one ear. When he was running on the water one could tell that his legs were somewhat crippled. From his empty sleeve, one could see that he also only had one hand. No wonder he had to first put the basin behind his back before he was able to pull out the sword. Seeing that enormous dragon head above the water, the small boy's complexion was pale. His teeth were chattering, not because of the ice-cold water from the stream, but because of the fear in his heart. This was his first time seeing a real dragon. He didn't even know what a dragon was, only that it was terrifying. Yet he did not flee, but held that flimsy-looking sword and tightly and securely hid that basin behind him. The golden dragon gazed indifferently at the boy, only a being as strong and powerful as it could tell that deep within the abyss of its eyes were anger and cruelty. The boy did not say anything, face pale, fear extreme, but he did not let go of the basin. The golden dragon grew angrier, dragon's breath encompassed both sides of the stream, and death was coming. The sword was left in the water, the boy took the basin and held it to his chest. The golden dragon's scales rubbed against the mist, bring about countless divine fires, causing the water within the stream to boil. At this moment, a middle-aged Taoist appeared by the stream. The middle-aged Taoist looked upon the golden dragon with a calm expression. The heavenly fire over the stream was suddenly extinguished. The golden dragon looked upon the middle-aged Taoist and spoke a dragon word. This dragon word was extremely long, almost as if it continued on forever without stopping. It surely contained an extremely complex meaning. Hearing it was like listening to a most complicated piece of music, but also like the sound of nature's most horrifying storm. It was a mixture of unimaginable power. The middle-aged Taoist looked at the golden dragon and spoke one word. It was a single-syllable word, its pronunciation extremely strange and difficult to understand. It did not seem like a human language at all. A fragment seemed to contain endless meaning, overflowing with ancient meaning. The golden dragon understood, but it did not agree. Then the fog over the stream fiercely rose up. Dragon's breath was sprayed everywhere, the moist grass and trees suddenly turned into a frightening scene of fire. That small Taoist boy with his back to the river simply had no idea what was going on. His head was bowed down in fear, his eyes shut, holding the wooden basin tightly to his chest. Who knows how much time passed, the stream side at last grew quiet. The small Taoist boy gathered up his courage and looked behind him, but only saw the clear water of the creek. The fire on both sides of the creek had already been extinguished, only the burned trees and roasted stones attested to the terrifying battle that had occurred. From the cloudy abyss came a dragon cry. This cry was full of anguish, unwillingness, and regret. The dragon was telling the world's 5 continents about how his own hesitation had brought about such profound regret. The Taoist boy was frightened badly. With his one hand holding the wooden basin, the boy limped onto shore and walked to the middle-aged Taoist side, timidly looking up towards the cloudy abyss. The middle-aged Taoist reached out his hand to put out a fire on the boy's shoulder. The Taoist boy thought of something, and with difficulty raised up the wooden basin. The middle-aged Taoist reached over to the wooden basin and gently took up the infant. His right hand took the cloth and wrapped it over the infant's body. His brows creased. "Your fate is definitely not good," he said with pity as he looked upon the cloth-wrapped infant. In the eastern continent's east, there is a small town called Xining. Outside of this town there is a small stream, by this small stream is a mountain, on this mountain there is a temple, in this temple there are no monks, only a middle-aged Taoist and his 2 disciples cultivating the way. The hill is a nameless hill, the temple is abandoned. Of the 2 disciples, the elder is called Yu Ren, the younger is called Qin Changsheng. Xining was within the Zhou country. 800 years ago, the great Zhou dynasty made the way the state religion. Down to the present Jingtong era, the state religion united the country as one. It was indeed worthy of respect. If speaking reasonably, a master and his 2 disciples ought to have lived a life of silk clothes and jade rice. But Xining was too remote, the abandoned temple was even more remote, other people were rarely seen, so they could only live a very plain life. Taoists naturally practice the way. Presently there are countless ways to cultivate, but that middle-aged Taoist's method of teaching the way compared to other sects was completely different. It did not specify any specific cultivation method, it did not care about absorbing light from one's fated star, nor did it care about refining the mind, it only emphasized one word. Memorize. From his childhood, Yu Ren was memorizing the texts of the way. Qin Changsheng, from the moment that he could open his eyes, was placed before the yellowed and old books. The first thing he could recognize was a room full of texts on the way. After he learned how to talk, he learned how to recognize letters, and then he learned how to memorize the characters in the classical texts on the way. Reciting and studying until able to memorize backwards, this was the life of those 2 disciples. When they awake at dawn, they are memorizing books. Under the scorching sun, they are memorizing books. In the evening, they are memorizing books. When the spring comes and flowers blossom, when the summer storms thunder, when the autumn wind blows, when the winter snow chills, they are in the row of crops, by the riverside, under the tree, by the plum flower, holding the classics of the way in their hands, studying, memorizing, not knowing the time gradually passing by. The abandoned temple has a room completely filled with classics of the way. When Yu Ren was 7 years old, he was bored and counted them. There were 3,000 of these books. In these 3,000 books, one book might have several hundred words, or perhaps several thousand. The shortest classic, the classic on gods, was only 314 words. The longest was the longevity classic which had more than 200,000 words. These books were the entirety of what they had to memorize. The elder and younger disciple ceaselessly memorized, only seeking to remember, not seeking to understand. They knew early on that their master would never answer the questions they asked, only say. Just memorize, and understanding will naturally come. To those children who studied the way but lived leisurely lives, this sort of life is hard to imagine. Fortunately this green mountain is very out the way and was rarely visited by people, so there were no external things to distract and the mind could concentrate. These 2 disciples' temperaments were exceptionally good. Unexpectedly they did not find this lifestyle to be dull, just going from day to day memorizing, not realizing that several years have passed. One day, the sound of studying that had gone on for several years suddenly ceased. 2 children sat upon a stone, shoulder to shoulder, a book propped open on their knees. They both took a glance at the book, then at each other, both at a loss at what to do. They had already memorized to the last book, but they had no means to continue because they could not understand. The words on this classic were unfamiliar, to be precise the words were very odd, the radicals and strokes were all recognizable but the character as a whole was a queer thing. How to study? What does it mean? The 2 children returned to the temple and found the middle-aged Taoist. The middle-aged Taoist said. In all the 3,000 classics of the way, you have read up to the very last book, this book has 1,601 words. In all the time that the way was passed down, no one has been able to completely understand the meaning within this book, how could you too? Chen Chongqing asked. Teacher, even you could not understand. The middle-aged Taoist shook his head and said. There is no person that would say what they truly understand and do not understand, I also cannot say. The two disciples looked at each other and felt some regret. Though they were only children, they had memorized all the 3,000 classics of the way but one, of course they would not be happy. Of course, they were not ordinary children, from the time when they were in ignorance they had accompanied each other in studying the classics of the way, their personalities were also rather relaxed, so these two people were prepared to turn around and leave. At this moment, the middle-aged Taoist continued speaking. But I can read it. From that day, the middle-aged Taoist began to lecture on the method to read the last classic of the way, one by one imparting the pronunciation of the characters. These pronunciations were particularly monstrous and strange. The syllable was simply, but it required the use of some certain throat muscles and also had some specific requirements. In short, it was not the sort of sound that a normal human being could produce. Chen Chongqing did not understand at all, he was like a little duckling, obediently copying his master's pronunciation. Yuren occasionally thought back to many years ago by that creek side, when the master faced that monstrous beast and spoke those words. Yuren and Chen Chongqing spent a long time grasping the pronunciation of those 1601 words, but still did not grasp the meaning. When asking the middle-aged Taoist they still could not obtain the meaning. In fact, they had already spent an entire year on this last book. Afterwards, they began their usual method, holding the last book in their hands and reciting, until at last they had it memorized. When they thought they had at last brought an end to their life of memorizing the classics of the way, the middle-aged Taoist required them to study the classics a second time. With little choice, the children were compelled to repeat their studies. Perhaps because this was the second time studying the classics of the way, they felt it was even more exhausting, they even felt like speaking bitter words. It was also at this time that they began to question, why did their master want them to study these classics? Why not teach us to cultivate? Obviously in the classics of the way was written how Taoists should practice the way, it should be correct to pursue longevity. When Yuren was 10 and Chen Chongqing was 6.5, in the autumn, a white crane came. It brought with it a silk document. On this document were a birth date, a marriage document, and a letter, some high official that the middle-aged Taoist had once saved wished to fulfill a promise he had made. The middle-aged Taoist saw the marriage document and laughed so hard he could not speak, and then looked over at his two disciples. Yuren waved his hand and pointed at his blind eye, smiling as he rejected the idea. Chen Chongqing had a frustrated expression. He did not understand the meaning, in confusion he had somehow ended up taking the marriage document, and now it turned out he had a fiancée. Later on, every new year, that white crane would return, bringing from the capital that noble man's greetings, along with some meaningful small gifts for Chen Chongqing. Chen Chongqing slowly came to understand what marriage meant. Often at night, by the starlight he would look at that marriage document sitting in the drawer. He had some feelings he could not speak. Towards his similarly aged fiancée, he had some happy, some embarrassed, mostly frustrated feelings. In this peaceful life of studying, when Chen Chongqing was 10 years old, there came an unfortunate accident. On a night, he was on his 72nd time in his memorization of the 1601 words of the last classic, when he suddenly felt a strange feeling in his body, he began to drift away in this forest on the green hill. His body began to emit some sort of beautiful scent. It was not the smell of a flower, nor was it the smell of a fruit, nor was it some sort of perfume. To speak of taste, while it was blown on the night wind for a while it did not scatter. To speak of its smell, it floated on the end of the nose, faintly discernible, but not a smell anything in the mortal world could produce. Incapable of grasping, but extremely alluring. The first to notice Chen Chongqing's situation was Yuren. When he smelled the rare scent, his expression grew severe. In the tree-covered and remote parts of the Green Mountain, there were lion roars and tiger cries, there were cranes dancing and dragons rushing, there were the thunder-like cries of frogs that originally only emerged in the summer. In the east of the Green Mountain, where no people dared to enter, from the misty abyss emerged an enormous shadow, who knew what sort of creature it was. Under the greedy and reverential gaze of countless creatures, Chen Chongqing emitted his rare scent, his eyes closed asleep, not knowing when he would wake. Yu Ren on the couch suddenly began to fan himself. He wanted to fan the smell on Chen Chongqing away, since this smell was making him salivated and giving him strange and terrifying ideas. He fanned himself to fan away these thoughts. The middle-aged Taoist did not know when he came to the side room, stood beside the couch, and saw the sleeping Chen Chongqing. He spoke one sentence that only he could understand. The reason is once again appearing. A night passed. The dawn light covered the Green Mountain, the scent coming from Chen Chongqing suddenly disappeared. One could no longer pick up the slightest scent. Chen Chongqing returned to his normal self, and the myriad monsters of the Green Hills and the monstrous shadow also took their leave. Yu Ren looked at his sleeping junior brother and stopped panicking, letting out a long breath. He wanted to wipe off the cold sweat on his forehead when he realized that his arm, from an entire night of fanning himself, was incapable of movement. Chen Chongqing opened his eyes and woke up. Though he was fast asleep all night, he knew that there was some problem. He saw the painful expression on his elder brother's face and his pale complexion and asked, "Master, what's wrong with me?" The middle-aged Taoist looked at him, and was silent for a long time before saying, "You are ill." According to the middle-aged Taoist, Chen Chongqing's sickness was due to a congenital deficiency. The body's 9 channels were not connected. Last night's scent was because the spiritual energy had nowhere to circulate, it could only emit outwards. This scent carried with it a human's essence, which carried a unique scent. This was a kind of strange disease. Then does Master know a way to treat it? No, no person can treat it. An incurable disease. This is just fate, right? Yes. It is just fate. After his 10th birthday, the white crane no longer came to the Green Hills. The capital's side cut off information, as if the matter of the marriage document had never been raised before. Chen Chongqing stood by the creek side, looking to the west, began to recall this situation. Of course, he was thinking about a lot of things. His illness, his fate. His health was not poor, besides that he easily fell asleep, he looked to be very healthy. He did not seem like a person that would die young. He even began to doubt his master's prognosis. But if his master's prognosis was correct, what then? Chen Chongqing resolved to leave the abandoned temple to see the flourishing secular world. Besides himself wanting to go see, he also wanted to see the legendary mausoleum of books, and he also wanted to return the marriage document. "Master, I'm going to leave." "Where are you going?" "To the capital." "Why?" "Because I want to live." "I said before, your illness is fate." "I want to change my fate." In the past 800 years, only 3 people have succeeded in changing their fate. Those were all extraordinary people. Yes. I am not, but I would like to try. The capital, Chen Chongqing wanted to go, regardless of if he could treat his illness or not, he always wanted to go. Not only because he wanted to change his fate, but because the marriage document's other party was also in the capital. He packed his luggage, took Yu Ren's small sword, and turned to leave. This 14-year-old Taoist priest descended the mountain. Chapter 1, I've changed my mind. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What kind of youngster is he? Very firm. He sat for an hour without changing his posture. He took only 1 drink at the very beginning, likely for the sake of courtesy, and hasn't done so since. On his first drink, he merely touched the cup with his lip. It seems like he isn't acting with restraint, but rather, he is acting with caution. He shows deep thoughts, an alert mind, and possibly even a degree of animosity. He seems to be a smart person, at the very least, not stupid. How old is he? 14. I also remember that he should be around that age. Yet his maturity makes him seem older than he really is. Just a normal person. Yes, his presence of qi is ordinary. He hasn't even experienced purification. Though we can't tell his potential, he is already 14, so even if he starts cultivating from the start again, it is unlikely that he will have a bright future ahead of him. Even if he has a bright future, how can he compare to the disciple of the longevity sect's headmaster? Madam, is that marriage contract real? The authenticating object is real, so the marriage contract is real. How could the elderly master had arranged such a marriage for the young lady? If the elderly master had not died, maybe you would be able to obtain the answer. Open the door, I am going to see him. Along with a sound, the door slowly opened. The sun shone into the room and lit up all the corners, alongside the madam's pretty face and the half-piece of jade pendant in her hand. The nanny who spoke to her before, stood in the corner and was entirely hidden by the shade. It took some effort to see her. With the nanny's support, the madam walked towards the outside of the room. She walked slowly like a thin willow whisked by the wind. The expensive gold hair clip in her hair and the pendant on her clothes did not make any sound, which appeared to be somewhat strange. The yard was very dark. On the grassland, there was a tree so huge that even 10 people couldn't encircle it. At the two sides of the road, there were no maids or servants. Far away though, faintly, you could see people kneeling down. The atmosphere around the place was very heavy, like the cold weapons exhibited in the parlor. The master of this estate is the great Zhou dynasty's well-accomplished divine general of the Eastern Decree, Ze Tian Ji. The divine general managed the estate like he did his troops. The estate had always been quiet and serious, and because of the event that occurred today, all of the maids and servants were driven out to a side yard. The atmosphere on the estate was depressing. Even the spring wind blowing from the outside seemed to be frozen. Madame Su passed through the courtyard and arrived at the side yard. With her eyebrows slightly stirred up, she stopped to look at the youngster in the room. That youngster wore a really old Taoist robe that had lost its color due to overwashing. He had a soft and immature face, upright eyebrows, and bright eyes, showing an inexpressible temperament that seemed as if he could see the truth of many things. The youngster put his luggage aside. The luggage looked really ordinary, but at the same time it was well organized. Not even a speck of dirt could be found, even the hat tied on the luggage was very clean. What made Madame Su cautious and annoyed by this, was the fact that the tea on the table was now cold, yet the youngster still kept a calm expression. She couldn't see any irritation on his face, which suggested this youngster possessed patience that people at his age didn't normally have. This would be a really hard person to deal with. Fortunately, most people like him were usually very arrogant. After he entered the divine general's estate and conversed with the nanny for a few minutes, no one bothered him. After sitting in the room for an hour, he was inevitably bored. But Chen Chongsheng was used to boredom when he was a child, therefore he was able to stand the boredom. Silently he spent his time memorizing the 6th chapter of Hua Ting scripture word by word. He was waiting for someone with authority to arrive so he can hand back the marriage vow to the divine general's family. After completing this task, he had a lot of personal matters to attend to. He took a sip of the tea to moisten his dried lips. He wasn't careful or suspicious like how the nanny thought he was. He just thought it would be impolite to use the bathroom as a guest in someone else's house after drinking too much water. In addition, although the cups at the divine general's estate were all luxurious china, he wasn't used to drinking from someone else's cup. TL note. Luxurious china means that the plates and cups were made out of glass and are high-priced / quality, BBKGS note. It's actually Ru-ware ceramics. He has a bit of OCD regarding using other people's things. He stood up and bowed toward the well-dressed lady. He guessed that she was probably Madame Su of the divine general's estate. He thought he could finally finish this business and move on. Chen Chongsheng reached into his pocket and prepared to take out the marriage vow. Madame Su stopped him in a relaxed and non-urgent manner. She sat down on a seat and accepted the tea from a maid. She looked at him and calmly said, "Did you visit the Mausoleum of Books? What about the Nai Bridge? The sight of ivy at the Imperial Palace is also beautiful." Chen Shangsheng thought it was Madame Su's polite way of starting the conversation, but he didn't think it was necessary to chat. But because an older person was talking, he couldn't be disrespectful. He answered in a simple manner, "I haven't yet. I'll go see them in the future." Madame Su's hand that held the teacup stopped in mid-air, so basically, after arriving to the capital, the first thing you did was come to the Divine General's estate. Chen Changsheng answered truthfully, "I didn't dare to delay." "Is that so?" Madame Su raised her head and gave him a cold look. She thought to herself, a poor youngster from the countryside wasn't attracted by the fancy sights of the capital and rushed straight to the Divine General's estate to talk about marriage. It's funny how he was in such a hurry. Chen Changsheng didn't know why Madame Su replied, "Is that so?" He stood up and reached into his pocket once again, wanting to give back the marriage vow. Since he decided to do so, he didn't want to waste any more time. But his action caused another misunderstanding. Madame Su looked at him and her eyes turned colder. "I do not accept this marriage, even if you take out the marriage vow, it is of no use." Chen Changsheng didn't expect to hear this, he was stunned for a moment. The elderly master was saved by your master and thus, settled this marriage. It seems to be a fancy tale. Madame Su looked at him and continued coldly, "But it is nothing more than just a tale, a drama. It can't happen in real life. Who would believe this?" Chen Changsheng wanted to explain that his intention was to forfeit the marriage. But after hearing these insulting words and seeing the disdainful expression on Madame Su's face, he couldn't open his mouth. His hand was still in his pocket, touching the marriage vow written by the Prime Minister. The paper contained the birth date and time of a certain young girl. After the elderly master passed away 4 years ago, this marriage doesn't exist anymore. Madame Su looked at the youngster in front of her and continued, "I know you are a smart person, then we should talk like smart people. The thing you should worry about is not continuing this marriage, but rather how you can obtain enough compensation for giving up on the marriage. What do you think of my suggestion?" Chen Changsheng took his hand out of the pocket but the marriage vow wasn't in his fingers. "Can I ask why?" "Why?" That is not a question a smart person would ask. Madame Su looked at him expressionlessly and said, "Because, although your master's medical techniques are good, he is still nothing more than a normal Taoist, but we are the family of the Divine General. Because you are just a poor youngster who can only afford to wear an old Taoist robe while my daughter is the daughter of the Divine General. Because you are just an ordinary person and the Divine General's estate is not a place where ordinary people belong. Is my explanation clear enough?" Chen Changsheng's hands clutched tightly but his voice didn't shake. "It's clear." Madame Su looked at the young face and decided to add a little more pressure. She knew what the smart and prideful youngster couldn't stand. A little later she expected him to voluntarily give up on the marriage. She placed the tea cup upon the table. She stood up and said, "The tea on your table is butterfly tea, it is worth 5 silver taels every 50 grams. The teacup is from the imperial kilns, it is more expensive than gold. The tea is cold, you didn't drink it, which means you are not worthy of the tea. You are just grass in rotten mud. You are not fine china, you are just broken fragments. You want to change your life by marrying into the Divine General's family. I'm sorry, it may please you, but I am not pleased." Madame Su's was calm. Although she didn't try to sound mean, she had already pushed him into the ground. She didn't speak with an intentionally condescending attitude, but instead the words felt like someone watching an ant from the sky. These feelings were all received by Chen Changsheng. Clearly it was all an insult. Especially when she said he was trying to change his life by marrying into the Divine General's family. It was unacceptable for any prideful youngster. To get back at her, most people would choose to argue angrily and take out the marriage vow, ripping it in half and throwing it upon Madame Sue's face, perhaps even spitting a few times. That would be the scene Madame Sue wanted to see. If it wasn't because that marriage vow was too unique, she wouldn't have needed to think deeply on how to solve this issue. The room was silent with no noise in sight. She stared coldly at Chen Changsheng and waited for his outburst. Yet, events completely fell outside of her expectations. Noel.N. Chen Changsheng looked at Madame Sue calmly and said, "I believe you are mistaken. My trip to the Divine General's estate was to give back the marriage vow to you. I wanted to forfeit the marriage from the start." The room was silent again. The wind blew into the room and the leaves were swirling in the air. Madame Sue was surprised. "Say that one more time." She didn't notice that her voice was nervous, yet relieved. She didn't care if the youngster was trying to cover up his embarrassment or wanted to forfeit the marriage, she wanted the promise to be nullified. Chen Changsheng looked at her seriously and said, "Actually that I came to forfeit the marriage." At the corner of the room, the nanny's expression changed. Madame Sue's expression didn't change, but her hand landed on her chest. The entire estate seemed to lighten up at this moment. But Chen Changsheng's expression became serious. He said, "But now that I've changed my mind." The wind in the estate turned cold again. The mood became oppressive. Madame Sue suddenly felt that she had done something wrong. She forcefully suppressed the uneasy feeling and tried to sound warm. "Why say this? If you've already thought it through, then why not?" Before she could finish, she discovered that the youngster had no intention to continue to listening to her words. Chen Changsheng picked up his luggage from the floor and put it on his back. He walked straight out of the room. Chapter 2, Why You Are Listening at Novel Full.Audio. Looking at the youngster's shadow disappear into the side yard, Madame Sue's face hardened. She wanted to take a drink of tea to soothe her dry throat but realized that her tea was already cold. She wanted to throw the cup to express her emotions, but she, though not caring about the cost of the porcelain cups, still did not want to let the servants hear any sounds that can be used to figure out her mood. She was not in a good mood. She could understand the message the youngster was expressing. "Sorry, this might make you happy but it makes me unhappy." In fact, that youngster had acted politely since the very beginning without showing any impolite behaviors. He had simply used two sentences with two completely different meanings and immediately turned to leave. The two sentences were all that were needed to make Madame Sue unhappy. This might also be a talent. That nanny's face was also gloomy. She walked over to Madame Sue's side, lowered her voice, and said, "Should we let him go that easily? I originally thought he was an arrogant youngster. Now I know he is actually a cunning and insidious villain. If he really wanted to create a good relationship with the Divine General's estate and remain so cautious that he wouldn't even take a drink of tea, how would he dare to bring the marriage contract with him and come to the mansion? The most annoying thing is that from the beginning to the end, was there anyone that actually saw the marriage contract?" Madame Sue understood what the nanny meant and said, with a cloudy face, "However, if he is smart, then he should know that in order to obtain more benefits, one should not do such extreme things from the beginning." Chen Changsheng didn't understand the events that occurred today. He arrived at the Divine General's estate intending to forfeit the marriage, but how did events turn out like this? What confused him the most was that the Divine General's estate had many methods to solve the problem, but why did the seemingly smart Madame Sue choose the worst method? Since he didn't understand many things, he stopped trying to think about them. After hearing the arrogant words of Madame Sue, Chen Changsheng grew curious about the daughter of the Divine General. What did she look like? Is she beautiful? Of course, if she grew up in a place like this, her personality shouldn't be too soft or kind. The Divine General's estate was huge. It was even bigger than the entirety of Xining village. Since there were no servants leading the way, he obviously became lost on the estate. By the time he noticed, he was already located in a wild forest. Thinking back to stories in which some poor son.in.law got murdered by his despicable mother.in.law, he felt a bit uneasy, but he was distracted by his own thoughts. Suddenly, he felt someone staring at him. He turned his head and looked toward the direction from which he felt the stare originate and saw a girl standing under a stone doorway at the end of the road. Chen Chongqing realized that he wasn't lost, but rather, was led here on purpose. The girl was around 13 years old. She was dressed luxuriously. The accessories she wore were worth more than all his belongings put together. She was pretty, and if she grew a little older, she would be a fair lady. Her cute dark pupils were focused on him. They were bold and observed him from head to toe. Chen Changshan was surprised. Is she the daughter of the divine general? Since he read the entire classical scripture when he was young, he was very patient. Chen Chongqing let the girl observe him closely and didn't say anything. Finally, the young girl broke the ice. Are Taoists allowed to marry? Chen Chongqing noticed that her eyes were on his Taoist hairstyle. He explained, I'm actually not a Taoist. Although I'm wearing a Taoist robe and have a Taoist hairstyle, this is just my habit. It doesn't mean that I'm a Taoist. The young girl walked in front of him and looked at him sincerely. Are you an ordinary person? Chen Chongshang was confused for a moment, then he realized what she meant by an ordinary person. He answered, yes, I have yet to cultivate. The young girl didn't notice that he said he has yet to cultivate and not that he can't cultivate. She stared into his eyes and asked, very seriously, are you vowed to marry my lady? After hearing this, Chen Chongqing knew that the young girl wasn't the daughter of General Su. He felt a little disappointed, but at the same time, relieved. You are. My name is Shuang Er. I'm the personal maid of my lady. Chen Chongqing would have never thought that a maid can wear such a luxurious attire. After seeing that there wasn't anyone else around, he had a clearer idea of the status of the young lady and the maid in the divine general's estate. I was vowed to marry your lady. The maid named Shuang Er looked at him and said, do not speak of this, ever. Why? Chen Chongqing asked. Still, this one word remained in Chen Chongqing's mind. Shuang Er looked at the young Taoist's upright countenance and felt pity for him. If you want to live, then do not talk about this marriage to anyone else, or no one will be able to save your life. She really felt that she was doing him a favor. Although her lady won't be marrying him, they were vowed to do so. Her lady had asked her to keep the youngster alive, but what she didn't realize was that her words sounded like threats to Chen Chongqing's ears. Chen Chongqing fell silent. He thought to himself, would the divine general's estate actually become an enemy and assassinate him? There were similar stories in the books and drama plays he had watched, but under the rule of the divine empress, who dared to do such things in the capital. He said, if the divine general's estate wanted me dead, then Madame Su wouldn't have let me leave in the first place. If I observed correctly, that old nanny is a strong character. Since there weren't many servants that saw me, they should have killed me outright and buried me in the garden as fertilizer. No one would have noticed, right? Therefore, I shouldn't be in any danger. Shuang Er scoffed coldly, countless people are watching the divine general's estate, therefore, you are actually safe within its territory. But when you exit, will you able to live like you said previously? Chen Chongqing thought about it for a moment, I don't understand. Shuang Er explained, if other people knew about your marriage vow with my lady, what would the longevity sect think? What would the clan of Qiu Shan think? Even if you are in the capital, no one can stop them from killing you. Chen Chongqing asked, longevity sect and clan of Qiu Shan. What are those places? Shuang Er looked at him and thought he was an idiot, you don't know anything. Chen Chongqing was confused, what should I know? The young Taoist from Xining village obviously didn't know some things, but those things were known to the entire world. For example, the world was under the rule of the Zhou dynasty. The divine general of the Eastern decree, Su Shiji, was deeply trusted by the divine empress. Su Shiji's father was the prime minister of the previous dynasty, but Su Shiji's status came mostly from his daughter. Su Shiji had only one daughter, her name is Su Yurong. She is the reincarnation of the sky phoenix. Her bloodline and talent was unimaginable. She successfully purified her bones and body at an extremely young age. When she was 12 years old, she traveled to the far south to study the heavenly tomes. Rumors said she was already at the upper stage of the meditation realm. Her name was renowned across the world. Everyone respected her and thought she was the only possible candidate for the next holy maiden of the radiant divinity faith. That young girl had the perfect background, teaching, and talent. Her admirers were countless. Rumors said that even the blood-thirsty prince of the demon race was one of them. But every time there was a discussion about who her future husband would be, people would only mention one name, and that name was also famous throughout the world. Qiu Shanjun. The clan of Qiu Shan was the most powerful clan in the south. This generation of the Qiu Shan clan had a son of enormous talent, and his name was Qiu Shanjun. He is the reincarnation of the heavenly dragon. He is the eldest disciple of the longevity sect and the head of the 7 laws. Qiu Shanjun followed his teachers to cultivate. Although right now he is 18 years old, he was already expected by many to be the future candidate to become the strongest person on the continent for the next few hundred years. Sky Phoenix and Heavenly Dragon, Qiu Shanjun and Su Yurong were fellow disciples under the same school. They were also the most famous of this generation. It was impossible to find a third young person that matches their talent. The entire world knows that Qiu Shanjun adored Su Yurong. He waited patiently for her coming-of-age ceremony. The entire longevity sect, Zhou dynasty, and clan of Qiu Shan thought that this pair of youngsters were destined to be together. Even Lady Mou in the imperial palace said that the divine empress liked the story between these two. Except, suddenly a young Taoist held a marriage vow and arrived at the divine general's estate. He said he is the fiancé of Su Yurong. If this word got out to the world, perhaps the entire continent would be shocked. The yard was silent. Wind occasionally blew bamboo leaves into the stone arch gate. Now you know. Shuang Er looked at Chen Chongsheng and said, "You are only an ordinary person, far removed from my lady's world. You can never shorten such a distance. For your own sake it would be better that you forget about this marriage vow." Indeed, Chen Chongsheng did not know that the girl who was engaged to him was such a great person. He thought a bit and then asked, "Why didn't Madame Su tell me before?" Shuang Er said, "Because Madame Su doesn't want you to make more requests after knowing this fact." He looked up at her and asked, "Why did you tell me this?" Shuang Er said, "Because my lady mentioned you in the letter. My lady is a gentle person, even though she won't marry you, she doesn't want to watch you die. Moreover, that I think you are smart, after knowing all these things, you should have enough self-understanding and make the only possible right decision." Chen Chongsheng said, "I know." After saying this, he walked toward the stone arch gate. He stepped on the bamboo leaves, making sha-sha sounds. Shuang Er was dumbfounded. She thought, "What kind of thing is this?" Chen Chongsheng suddenly stopped his steps, turned around and looked at her. Shuang Er let out a sigh of relief and put her hand on her chest, awaiting his decision. Chen Chongsheng looked at her and asked, "I want to get out, which way is it?" Chapter 3, This is a crude name, but it is my name. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Shuang Er came back from her thoughts after a while. She could tell that the young Taoist priest was not trying to sneer at her intentionally. Instead, he really didn't take her words into consideration. Looking at his serious and calm expression, she felt her anger rising up within her. She said angrily, "You will die." Chen Chongsheng opened his eyes and said, "Everyone will die." Shuang Er said, "You know that I didn't mean it that way." Chen Chongsheng said seriously, "Thank you for informing me about the situation. Shuang Er's face turned angrier by the second and she said, "The madam wanted to annul the engagement, there definitely will be payback. Why did you have to get upset and tell her that you came to cancel the engagement? Did you do it so that you can get your pride back? If you really did make a decision based on your pride, it's still fine, but why did you change your mind at the last moment? Such an attitude is surely not pretty. Actually, that I really did come to cancel the engagement, whether if you choose to believe it or not. However, I don't want to cancel it anymore." "Why?" Chen Chongqing tilted his head and pondered seriously. A smile gradually appeared on his immature face because he ascertained that he found a reason which could be used to convince himself, and he said, "Because you guys never ask for my name." "Why?" Shuang Er did not understand. "From entering the estate till now, whether the madam or you, neither of you have asked for my name." Chen Chongsheng looked at her and said, seriously, "My name is Chen Chongsheng. I know this name is really crude, but my master wished for me to live a long life. Chongsheng means longevity in Chinese, the intention is really nice, so I kept this name." After saying these words, his eyes became bright and his attitude became decorous. Shuang Er suddenly thought that the ordinary young Taoist priest revealed some sort of luster. It was probably due to that serious temperament. After understanding his reasons, she no longer felt confused or bewildered. Ever since he entered the divine general's estate, no one asked for his name. Although he was treated this way, he didn't show any anger or the feeling of having been humiliated. When he was talking to the madam or Shuang Er, he behaved politely all the time, without lacking in any courtesy. Even though he appeared slightly inflexible and old-fashioned, strangely, the people who made him unhappy were the ones who were eventually worse off than him. It's not that he was good at making people unhappy, but he was serious when doing the things he thought he should do. His decision to cancel the engagement felt right to him in that others can't deny the choices that he makes himself. Because the people who made him unhappy weren't able to ignore his decisions, they were left feeling worse than him. Shuang Er had lived on the divine general's estate since she was a child. Because of her master, she had a high status. Even the divine general and the lady of the estate wouldn't criticize her. Moreover, she had never encountered people like Chen Chongsheng. Chen Chongsheng made her feel insecure and she wasn't used to it. Not sure if she wanted to convince Chen Chongsheng or herself, she softened her tone and said, "On the entire continent, only my lady possesses the blood of the phoenix. She is unique. My senior brother had a quote in his notes. I've always thought it was very rational, now I give it to you, hopefully you can understand it later on." He said. "Everyone in the world is unique." Chen Chongsheng gave her a serious look. At the end of the long street there was a shabby stone arch bridge. Under the bridge was not Luo River, but instead, it was a small unnoticeable river. Chen Chongsheng walked on the bridge and turned back to look at the divine general's estate. He felt that the region was quite prosperous. Among the countless big houses, Su Mansion was the most outstanding one. He involuntarily shook his head. After he went into the capital, he didn't go visiting famous attractions. He also didn't have any urge to go see the mausoleum of books. Instead, he simply cleaned up a bit on the side of the Luo River and walked directly to the divine general's estate. He wanted to cancel the engagement. He really was in a rush. If he married the divine general's daughter, but he couldn't cure his disease, he would be wasting her life. Why would he implicate her? Even if it was curable, it would probably still take many years. Out of goodwill, he did not want to waste someone else's youth, but he didn't expect that he would face the supercilious looks, contempts, and ridicule of others at Su Mansion. Now he recalled that after he reached the age of 10, the temple had not received her gifts anymore. The two sides stopped interacting with each other, which meant the opposite side already had the intention of breaking the engagement. Today he had come to the capital to actively cancel the engagement. This was originally a simple thing, a thing that both sides wanted, but he didn't expect to encounter such an outcome. Therefore he changed his mind on the spot. He did not cultivate and he was not a Taoist priest, but he had read the scriptures of the Way, Taoist canon, since childhood, so he was deeply influenced by them. His destiny was gloomy from the start, therefore, during his journey he chose to follow the will. The so-called follow the will was basically to feel at ease. Traveling for so long to reach the capital in order to cancel the engagement was following the will. Not canceling the engagement was also following the will. The divine general's estate was impolite, so he didn't want them to feel at ease, because then he wouldn't feel at ease. Of course, Chen Changsheng only wanted the divine general's wife, who hid coldness behind her kind face, and the maid, whose eyes only looked at the sky, to feel harried for a while. After a few days, he would still return the marriage contract. Life and death matters more than a grudge. Miss Su's lifelong happiness was obviously more important than the cold reception and supercilious looks he received. He still thought that way. However, it was still not a happy event. Sometimes, Chen Changxing himself would even forget that he was only a 14-year-old boy, but in the end, he was still but a boy. He had his own pride, so he would feel unhappy after being humiliated. He walked down the stone bridge and bought 2 sesame seed cakes from a street shop. He squatted on the stones near the river and ate the cake while looking at the distant divine general's estate. He felt slightly sour. He knew where the feeling originated from, but he also knew that if he let such a feeling overflow it would hurt his own health and wouldn't help in solving the problem. On the Luo River, the boats were like clouds. On the long street, on the opposite side of the river, there were wolf riders from the west. Even from a really far distance, people can still smell the rancid scent from the huge wolves' mouths. There was a shadow flowing by the river surface. Looking up, he saw a horse with 2 white wings dragging a gorgeous wagon to the north. At the distant Archer Tower, red eagles kept arriving and departing to transfer military info. At the farther green sky, there were more flying mounts from the military, like annoying dragonflies outside the temple. This is the capital of the Zhou dynasty. There were countless scenes that country-folk couldn't even imagine. Chen Changsheng was biting his sesame seed cake. Opening up his eyes, enjoying these pictures, and comparing them to what he read in the scriptures of the Way, he thought that maybe he could get to see legendary creatures such as the turtle that had carried stone pillars for over 3,000 years at Li Palace. He was not sure if there was still dragons in the imperial palace. He heard that the most noble and rare golden dragon had not shown up in the secular world for several tens of thousands years. Would he get to see it in the future? Oh, there was also the phoenix. Thoughts like these ran through his head while he ate. The sesame seed cake smelled very good, but it was very hard as well. It took some effort to eat it. Chen Changxing originally thought that he had already forgotten about what he experienced at the divine general's estate and had successfully rid himself of the sour feelings, but after thinking about the word phoenix, he automatically recalled the phoenix blood that he heard today. He recalled Su Mansion's young lady who possessed the phoenix blood, and recalled the gifts he received from many years ago. He looked at the last piece of sesame seed cake in his hand. Dazed for a while, he put it into his mouth and carefully chewed 32 times. Swallowing it into his stomach, he took out a handkerchief from his sleeve and cleaned up the cake crumbs. He stood up and packed up, before disappearing in the crowd. He did not notice that in the corner, not far away, there was an unimpressive wagon. At an unimpressive place on the wheel, there was a bloody phoenix symbol. Of course, even if he saw it he wouldn't know that this symbol represented the divine general of the Eastern Decrees estate. After young Miss Su was born, the divine empress had presented the bloody phoenix to the divine general's estate as a new emblem. This was a high prestige and some sort of declaration. Looking at the area under the bridge, the warhorse, that appeared cold and aloof in front of the wagon, had unicorn's blood. Inside the wagon, the old lady's eyes were also very cold, but there was also surprise, caution, and worry in her eyes. After Chen Changsheng left the divine general's estate, she had followed him. She didn't know that after the youngster saw the Zhou capital he would continue to remain that calm. He didn't look like an uneducated country child at all. That was because she didn't know the youngster had already read countless books since he was very young. In the books he had already seen countless landscapes and traveled countless miles. Ze Tian Ji sat in his study room. His enormously built body spread a slight scent of blood. 10 yards away from the window, the birds were hiding their heads beneath their wings and dared not to make any noise. The strong bloody presence proved the horrific power of this great Zhou general, but it also showed that he wasn't in a good mood. The reason for his irritated mood was the jade pendant on his table. When my father was still the prime minister, he was deeply trusted by the divine empress. He was sent by her to Mount Tai to perform a ceremony for the dynasty. The demon race tried to sabotage the event by sending out Gong Yangchun to assassinate my father, and he was severely wounded. It was so bad that even the Pope couldn't heal his wound. Only until a traveling Taoist traveled past Taishan city and healed his wound did he live. Therefore this marriage vow was made. Madame Su whispered, then that Taoist must have had some extraordinary skills. Ze Tian Ji raised his head and looked at the bright sky out of the window. We live in a world with unlimited possibilities and countless heroes. That Taoist was regarded as a saint in the field of medication and healing. Of course he was extraordinary. Why else would father vow to marry Rong heir to his heir? Madame Su was nervous. Right now the most important thing is that marriage vow. If that Taoist has no background and isn't some important figure, then this situation can be handled much smoother, without many interruptions. Ze Tian Ji answered expressionlessly, teach that young Taoist to be a little more sensible. Madame Su lowered her voice so low that if one didn't listen carefully it couldn't even be heard. The young Taoist didn't seem like a character that can be placated by simple gifts. What if he stands his ground? The Mausoleum of Books is going to open next year and the Southern Saints are definitely going to send people here. I'm afraid that they are going to propose to the government. We can't mess up during a time like this. Ze Tian Ji closed his eyes slightly, like a tiger going to sleep, then just burn him into ashes and throw them into the river. The raining season was arriving soon and the water level of the river Luo was about to rise. Ashes or bones, once they sunk into the river, they will all disappear in an instant. Chapter 4, Heavenly Academy. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Like every morning for the past 14 years, Chen Changsheng woke up at 5, used 5 seconds to calm himself, then got off the bed, dressed up, folded the quilts, and made the bed. In the dining room of the inn, he ate a bowl of duck porridge and 4 freshly made hot meat buns. He then returned to his bedroom, rinsed his mouth using the tea from last night, and dressed up before walking out into the yard. Now that he was no longer in the small temple at Xining village, he didn't have to chop firewood and deliver water. Facing the morning fog and light coming from far away, he closed his eyes and started to silently read the scriptures of the way. Until he felt refreshed and alert, his daily routine of the day was over. He walked out from the side door to the crowded and noisy street in the capital. He had a roster in his hand. On the roster were the names of some schools in the capital. After getting the addresses from the market manager, he walked faster. He didn't notice that there was a wagon following him. He didn't see that the horse possessed unicorn blood, and of course, he didn't notice the bloody phoenix emblem on the wheel. Long ago, the heavenly tomes descended upon the world. Humans were enlightened, and developed countless teachings, but all the change originated from one point. The classics and scrolls that were written in the past all traced the source of the change. Agriculture, industry, business, and education were all included. Now, publicly, the most authoritative evaluation to these was the annual Grand Examination. The Grand Examination was initiated by the first emperor of Zhou, Emperor Taizu. Whether to become a government official, military general, or even a priest in the orthodoxy, the grade from the Grand Examination was the most important criterion. Most importantly, Emperor Taizu declared that only the top 3 grades had the right to enter the Mausoleum of Books. Because of this rule, each year, countless elites would come to the capital. During the year of the first Grand Examination, Emperor Taizu stood on the wall to look at the geniuses from various sects on the continent who came in. He smiled and then spoke a line which is not only famous today but also established the status of the grand examination. In the southern countries, the powerful sects, such as the longevity sect, were extremely dissatisfied with this rule. To them, even though the mausoleum of books was at the capital of Zhou, the heavenly tomes were divine rocks that had fallen from heaven and should be the commonwealth of the entire continent. Therefore, the South had attempted to resist the grand examination for many years, making the relationship between the two sides tense. The mausoleum of books was too important to cultivators. Even though the Zhou dynasty was very strong, it still could not monopolize it. The South, on the other hand, also could not resist the lure to enter the mausoleum to see the stela. Even after the demons were defeated, the South still tried to resist the grand examination publicly. Even though the South tried to resist, there were many elites that traveled from the South to take the exam in private. After the divine empress came to power, the Zhou dynasty eventually formed an agreement with the South. The southern sects and countries were allowed to freely send out diplomatic corps to participate in the grand examination. To make it fairer, the evaluation was based on both sides. Moreover, the southern students did not have to accept titles and rewards from the Zhou dynasty. The test takers will all be treated equally. After many years, the examinations got a brand new name. Grand Examination. In many years, the grand examination selected countless elites. It's known that the strongest elites on the continent had all traveled to the Zhou capital and participated in the grand examination. Other well-known facts were: the current Pope of the Orthodoxy and the elder of the South's Holy Maiden Peak were once winners of the grand examination. Not to mention, some geniuses from the West Xiao race transformed themselves as humans and came to participate in the grand examination. Even for the demon race, there was a prince who took the risk to come and participate. His identity was detected by the former pope and exorcised into ashes. Those were stories from many years ago. Now, what people were more concerned about was, in next year's grand examination, would Qiu Shanjun from the longevity sect attend? How many of the 7 laws would get into the first grading? Would Su Yurong break through her stage early and leave Holy Maiden Peak to return to the capital? Would the cold and mysterious genius elite on the demon's wild plains appear in front of people for the first time? Or would he continue to violently chase and kill more demons? People in the capital also cared about how many outstanding geniuses from all the schools in the capital will show up this year. Yes, there are many schools in the capital. The Divine Empress held power. Under her strict rule, the government officials were candid and efficient. TL. Yes, sure. Look at the Su family, please. They are totally candid. People's lives gradually improved. In these decades, the empire was in a golden age. Multiple schools appeared like the bamboo shoots in spring after raining. Indeed, in recent years there were many private schools that were taught by the elites from the orthodoxy. Their goal was to aim specifically for the grand examination. Of course, the most famous and influential schools were still the ones with the longest history. Among them, 2 of the schools were even established earlier than the Zhou dynasty. On Chen Chongsheng's roster were 6 schools. The Heavenly Academy he was currently walking to was on the top of the list. In fact, even among the entire continent, Heavenly Academy could be ranked highly. In the recent 200 years, students from Heavenly Academy have obtained first place in the grand examination a total of 24 times. The students of Heavenly Academy were all very talented. The school nurtured many important priests for the orthodoxy, and educated countless cultivators for many sections. More importantly, the current Pope of the Orthodoxy was a past student of Heavenly Academy. Heavenly Academy had the best record, so it was the hardest to get into, but there were still many taking the entrance exam. Chen Chongsheng walked to the entrance of Heavenly Academy. Looking at the gate and looking at the name written by the first emperor of the Zhou dynasty, Emperor Taizu, he naturally felt a yearning to attend the school. Almost immediately, such a feeling was crushed due to the smell of sweat and ink. Subconsciously, he looked down. When he left Xining village, he had already calculated the time. The time he arrived at the capital coincided with the days the schools were recruiting students. He also expected that the number of people taking the exam would be large, but he didn't expect it to be a horrifying number. Especially when he looked at the young men who stood crookedly, looking lazy, and pointing at the crowd, he felt extremely uneasy. Those young men wore the same style of attire. The clothes were mostly black and tied with a golden belt. That should be the uniforms of Heavenly Academy. Chen Changxing knew that the people in line were the students who failed to pass the entrance exam at the beginning of the year. These people were usually full of themselves, but now they were embarrassed due to their failure. They didn't show any good attitudes toward the test takers. Looking at the mocking expression in their eyes, Chen Changxing lowered his head even more. The act of lowering his head wasn't due to fear, but rather, was due to his slight misophobia. Whether mentally or physically, he didn't want to smell the sweat, nor hear the insulting words of the crowd. Just look at that idiot, looking like a pig. Why would he stick a fan into his collar? Does he think he is Prince Huanyu? Why didn't he think that his fat neck will break the fan? That's true, his steps seem to be soft and unsteady. He's probably only completed purification for 2 months. How does he dare come to the entrance exam of Heavenly Academy when he hasn't set the groundwork for the purification stage? Where does he think he is? Orthodox Academy. Hilarious that I don't understand what these idiots are thinking of. Do they really think they can read and understand all the scriptures of the way with such a weak spirit and mind? Read and understand all the scriptures of the way. Even the bookworm, Go Han-shi, doesn't dare to say he's accomplished that. You guys may sympathize with the troubles those idiots are going to endure, but I feel bad for their parents. Embarrassing themselves may be bad, but the money they wasted earlier can't be refunded. If I was the parent of that idiot pig, I would use the money to buy some pills and have him lose some weight so that he can at least find a wife to marry. So what if he found a wife to marry? The Han Mei pill can only cure one person. If he has 17 sons and daughters in the future, all of them will be as fat and stupid as he is. Is taking care of a litter of pigs a good thing? These students were laughing among themselves and recklessly commenting on the people taking the entrance exam. Their words were unbearable and they didn't control their volume. They actually wanted to be heard by the people they insulted. The face of the fat kid who got bullied turned bright red, but he dared not to resist because everything the students said were true. He had just reached purification 10 days ago and probably had no chance to enter Heavenly Academy, but the most important point was that even if he did enter the academy, he wouldn't dare to mess with these seniors. Chen Changxing walked through the crowd and heard the unbearable conversation. He raised his eyebrows slightly and thought, if he was to be the one those students were commenting on, he didn't know if he could endure such insults. But luckily his head was low and his presence was ordinary. No one noticed him in the sea of people. He successfully passed the inky jade door and entered the school. Because he was thinking about other things and his head was low, he didn't notice that the 2 big stone walls, next to the entrance of Heavenly Academy, had a few hundred names carved on them. It seemed like a list of some sort. Many desperate and admiring eyes were observing the names. The family members and servants following the students taking the entrance exam weren't allowed into Heavenly Academy, therefore, after the students entered the school the environment suddenly became spacious. Chen Changxing took out a clean white handkerchief from his pocket and swiped the sweat off his face. He took deep breaths to calm himself before he advanced. Following the student in front of him, he got to the back of the long line. The number of people taking the entrance exam were countless. The line was so long that it looked like the 100-yard snake from Western mythology. The line stretched from the faraway building all the way to the grass field in front of Chen Changxing. There was even a beautiful brook between the 2 locations. Many students who were taking the entrance exam stood on the wooden bridge on top of the brook. The cold wind of early spring blew into their faces and they were chilled by the coolness. Soon enough, there were people coming out of the building and all of them were young men and young girls. They were just as expressionless as the people standing on top of the bridge due to the cold air. But since they weren't being blown at by the cool wind, it was probably due to their bad results. The people who were still in line became nervous after seeing their terrible expressions and stopped chatting with each other. Since Chen Chongqing didn't know anyone, he didn't chat with anyone. He looked at the far-away building curiously. The only thing he cared about right now was the entrance exam of Heavenly Academy. Was it still conducted the same way as stated in the books? Why did the people who fail back out so quickly? Has the exam of Heavenly Academy actually changed? The crowd kept on moving forward. After passing the grass field and the brook, Chen Chongqing arrived at a bamboo scaffold. Looking at the teacher who had a serious expression sitting behind the stone desk, Chen Chongqing saw a black stone fragment on the table. He realized the identity of the item. Remembering an old event that occurred in the Tao scroll, he was slightly stunned. Chapter 5, The Blue Shirt Youngster Called 36. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The students who entered the entrance exam followed the teacher's command and picked up the stone one by one. As they held the stone tightly for a few seconds, the black stone would emit light in the hands of the people. Sometimes the light was bright, sometimes dim, and sometimes the stone didn't change at all. The pitch-black stone has a very unusual name called the sensory stone. There was a chapter named 10,000 Uniques in the scriptures of the Way which described special or weird items all over the world. Chen Chongqing saw the picture of this stone in the chapter and knew its special effect. The dark stone naturally contained a trace of spiritual power. When it came in contact with a human body, a small trace of this power would sink into people's body and activate the person's true essence. Just like fishing, the stone will absorb the true essence and start to emit light. The stronger the true essence of the holder, the brighter the stone will shine. After years of testing, humans already concluded its usage. They can use the brightness of the stone to determine the strength of the holder. Because there are too many people taking the entrance exam every year, this extra step was added. People continuously reached for the stone and held it. Some brightened but some dimmed. Some people continued toward the building while some people were stopped by the teacher. The entire line's mood was depressed. One boy held the dark stone but the dark stone didn't give off any reaction. When he was asked to leave by the teacher, he fell into hopelessness and cried for another chance. He held the dark stone tightly in his hand and refused to let go. However, his struggle didn't bring anything but mockery from the crowd. The exam continued. People who could make the dark stone shine had a happy look on their face while the people who couldn't were disappointed beyond their beliefs. Faintly you could hear the mocking from the senior students on the other side of the river. The face of the teacher who was responsible for the dark stone stage turned darker as more and more students held the stone. Since the morning until now, several hundreds of people had held the sensory stone. Although many of them could make the stone glow, which meant that they are already in the purification stage, the results couldn't compare to the past. The performance of this year's students were too ordinary. There was only one person at stage 3 of purification. No one had reached the peak of the purification stage. Geniuses who are able to reach the meditation realm at a young age were nowhere to be found. Because of this, the teacher's mood wasn't exactly positive. The human race's way of cultivation is very different from the Yao race and demon race. At the beginning, humans needed to open their minds through education, train insight through meditation, and use the wisdom and spirit of nature to purify their body. This process starts from skin then continues down to veins and muscle. It goes all the way until it reaches the bones and marrows. When they reach the peak, humans are strong enough to lift stones and resist regular illness. This is called the purification stage. However, the demon race are born with rock-solid bodies. If humans didn't go through the purification stage, they aren't even able to fight against them on the battlefield. Therefore, to join the military and fight, people need to at least be in the purification stage. Besides this, purification has one other important usage, and that is strengthening the bones and veins of the human body. It also helps to open the minds of people. After purification, a human's memory ability and thought processes grow to a new height. Using a summary from the scriptures of the way, it described it as seeing a whole new world. There was a saying, there are 3,000 ways in the world. There was an ocean of literature and countless words in the world. If a person didn't purify her body, how dare he challenge himself to seek the knowledge in the sea? Even he, if was bold, he would be lost in a second and killed by the endless waves of uncertainty. This extra step that Heavenly Academy added recently was very logical. If you weren't even in the purification stage, how are you even qualified to cultivate deep and mystical techniques? Yesterday at the Divine General's estate, Chen Changsheng mentioned twice that he didn't cultivate. Naturally, he didn't purify his body either. This means that later, when he holds the dark stone in his hand, the dark stone won't emit any light and he will be expelled from the line for entering the exam. But the weird thing was that his expression remained extremely calm. He didn't seem to be worried. Right now, he's very close to that table. There were only 3 people in front of him. The frontmost person was a youngster who wore a blue shirt. The youngster walked towards the table and didn't wait for the teacher to speak and picked up the dark sensory stone with his hand. Unknowingly, everyone felt nervous at this moment. Perhaps it's because the youngster was too calm. During that early spring, the capital was always cloudy. The sun was blocked by the white clouds in the sky and the grassfield was dark. Suddenly, the grassfield on the 2 sides of the brook turned brighter, as if the newly grown grass leaves became jade. The leftover dew became pearls. The thin fishes in the clear brook looked at the sky and was stunned by the light. The crowd instinctively covered their eyes. They thought it was the light shining on the earth by the cloud-broken sun. However, they realized in the next moment that even the brightest spring sunlight couldn't be this intense. If it wasn't sunlight, then where did this bright light came from? As the light dimmed away, their eyes adapted to the brightness. People put down their hands and saw the teacher from Heavenly Academy drop his jaw. His face was full of unthinkable surprise. Simultaneously, people realized where the light originated from. It came from the palm of that youngster wearing a blue shirt. The once pitch-black sensory stone was now like the hottest rock in the opening of a live volcano. Countless light rays were emitted from the separation of his fingers. It seemed like it was burning. Meditation really is meditation realm. The teacher from Heavenly Academy said with a shaking voice. Right now he's looking at the blue shirt youngster as if he was a precious gem. He hurried to stand up and walked towards him. The teacher lowered his head and greedily looked at his palm and the light emitted from the stone. No one thought that the teacher misbehaved. You have to know that the blue shirt youngster looked very young. He was definitely not over 16 years of age, but was already in the meditation realm. What did this mean? What is a genius? This is a genius. The senior students on the riverside had already stopped their teasing a long time ago. Instead they looked down the bamboo shed as if they saw a ghost. The senior student who teased the most was so surprised, that he slided off of the stone chair and fell on the ground. He was so surprised that he didn't even feel the pain from his backbone at all. All shaken up, he said, "How is this possible? Even Guanbai Senior only the meditation realm at 16. This this kid just young looking. Otherwise how is it possible?" At this moment, an old and cold sound came behind them. If he is Tang 36, then there is nothing impossible. Tang 36. So he is Tang 36. After the crowd heard the name, they felt even more shocked. Someone said, he was already at the 36th place on the proclamation of azure clouds. Why did he leave Wen Shui and come to the capital? For next year's grand examination. But his ability is more than enough to enter the mausoleum of books. Someone explained, Tang 36 is very arrogant. He thinks no one is better than him. Not to mention the 7 laws. He even remains unconvinced that he is weaker than the wolf kid in the north. Since he was going to enter the grand examination next year, he would definitely change his name. By doing so that he obviously wants to arrive at the capital early. Since he is coming to the capital, he obviously wants to join our Heavenly Academy. After they mentioned the name Tang 36, the students thought of the rumors about the Wen Shui young genius. They involuntarily applauded. Someone then said, he thinks he is superior to almost everyone among the 7 laws, but how does he dare to feel he is stronger than Qiu Shanjun? That's unknown, but based on the brightness of the black rock, he probably didn't use full power. Even if he hasn't reached the completion of the meditation realm, he is probably not far away from it. The crowd continued this discussion for a long while. Suddenly they recalled the old voice they heard. They turned around and realized that the incoming person was the scariest vice principal Zhuang of Heavenly Academy. They involuntarily got scared and made a bow to show courtesy right away before rushing to give way. Both elites and geniuses deserved to receive others' sights. The youngsters who were taking the entrance exam didn't recognize the blue-shirt youngster, but they felt both surprise and admiration from looking at his back. Chen Changsheng looked at that blue-shirt youngster. He also felt admiration, but he didn't have such talent, so he was somewhat envious. The blue-shirt youngster coldly walked forward. Shortly after, he entered the building deep into Heavenly Academy, but everyone else's exams had to continue. In a short while, it was finally Chen Changsheng's turn. He walked to the table. He took a look at that black rock which had a rough surface and faintly infinite small holes. He hesitated for a while but finally grabbed the black rock and lifted it in front of his eyes. He began to look at it closely. He could clearly feel that a cool and comfortable air came out of one of the black rock's small holes. It flowed along the center of his palm and entered his body. It then circulated along his vessels at a high speed, attempting to go into the deeper places to seek his true essence. The cold air apparently had no consciousness and obviously no malevolence. He didn't do any reaction, allowing it to seek around. Of course, even if he wanted to react against it, he didn't have any ability. He understood very clearly that his vessels had some problems. Before he started the curing process, that air could not find out anything. Since there was no true essence flowing back. No mentality sensed. The black rock obviously wouldn't light up. Nothing surprising occurred. The black rock was a still black rock, quietly lying on his palm. He put the black rock back to the table, looking toward the Heavenly Academy teacher and said, "It didn't light up." In others' eyes, he had simply grabbed the stone then put it down. Such an obvious fact, but he confirmed it seriously, which might have appeared somewhat funny. Strangely, no one laughed. As they looked at his indifferent facial expression, people felt somewhat strange. The previous youngsters who did not make the stone light up all felt somewhat shameful and also sad due to failure. They would even cry like the previous boy. He looked too calm. Did he not understand what this meant? It seemed like that's not the case. The teacher slightly frowned. He should have just waved his hand and suggest Chen Changsheng leave, but because of the strange silence, he asked, "You can't cultivate?" "I have not cultivated." Chen Changsheng said a sentence that he had repeated twice yesterday at the Divine General's estate. The teacher looked at him expressionlessly, implying, "Why don't you leave now?" Chen Changsheng made a bow to show courtesy, then left. The direction he was heading for was not the gate of Heavenly Academy, but towards the building. The teacher felt shocked before he realized what he was trying to do and shouted angrily, "Stop!" Chapter 6, Test of Luck. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chen Changsheng stopped walking and turned towards the teacher. He was rather confused by his anger. He then realized where the anger came from. The previous students who failed this part of testing all backed out disappointingly. As a result, the instructor thought he would have done the same. However, Chen Changsheng kept on walking regardless of the results. This of course, didn't make the teacher too happy. Chen Changsheng didn't want to waste his precious time on useless arguments and debate. He bowed sincerely to the teacher and explained plainly, "Sir, I'm not trying to cause trouble." That teacher wanted to scold him for trying to cause trouble in the testing field, but suddenly Chen Changsheng defended himself before he said anything. He was so shocked that he was stuck between his words. The teacher coughed a little and yelled, "Then why aren't you leaving yet?" The young students behind Chen Changsheng in line were already waiting impatiently. They realized that he didn't have any intention to leave and thought he was trying to slow down the process to get back at the academy. They got irritated as well and start to yell at Chen Changsheng with the teacher. Some of them even mocked that he had mental issues. Chen Changsheng heard the words in mockery, but his expression didn't change a bit. His calmness was rather rare in a 14-year-old youngster. He looked at the teacher and bowed again with manner, "I have yet to cultivate, but I can still apply for Heavenly Academy." The teacher was stunned. He didn't know what the youngster was trying to say. He has yet to reach the purification stage, then how was he qualified to enter the exam? There was no exception in recent years. Even if there was, then why would he be the exception? Chen Changsheng continued, "According to the 8th note of the 4th ruling of the 17th chapter of the Law of Heavenly Academy, the only needed qualification to enter the school is to pass the written exam. 11 years ago, there was such a case in the Ministry of Personnel." Looking at Chen Changsheng's inexpensive clothing, the teacher instinctively wanted to rebuke him for lying. It was not because he disliked the poor, but rather he couldn't believe that the poor youngster in front of him was more knowledgeable than he was about the Law of Heavenly Academy. What note? What ruling? Was it actually mentioned in the law? Then how come he had no memory of it? Just when the teacher was about to call people to drag this youngster out of the field, he heard the words, "Ministry of Personnel." He was surprised and didn't order the guards. The Ministry of Personnel used to be an insignificant department under the Zhou dynasty. However, after the Divine Empress came to power and after her famous subordinate Zhou Tong took care of the place, the once unnoticeable Ministry of Personnel changed drastically. Countless officials who were loyal to the previous royal clan died mysteriously in the seemingly ordinary buildings of the department. Slowly, this name was feared by all officials of the Zhou dynasty. Although Heavenly Academy wasn't in the territory of the Ministry of Personnel, it nonetheless feared it. The thing that worried the teacher the most was that the Ministry of Personnel wanted to eliminate their bad name. As a result, they did everything legally. If there was actually a ruling in the Law of Heavenly Academy mentioned by the youngster and he dragged the youngster out, then he would be in deep trouble. Looking at the calm expression of Chen Changsheng, the teacher suddenly felt insecure. After a few moments of hesitation, he yelled at the back of the crowd and turned away and left. The mocking and yelling of the crowd stopped and turned to whispering. No one knew what was happening. After a while, the teacher finally returned. The expression of his eyes toward Chen Changsheng was complicated. Chen Changsheng knew that he probably went to check the Law of Heavenly Academy and saw the note he mentioned earlier. He read the entire 3,000 scriptures of the way when he was young and memorized the countless literatures from front to back. He even read laws and manners of different countries countless times. Of course he wasn't wrong. Even if you continue testing, you have no chance. Why waste your time? The teacher said strictly to Chen Changsheng with no expression. Chen Changsheng answered, "I still want to try." The teacher said, "You have yet to reach purification, how are you going to answer the questions? Furthermore, your mind will be damaged by doing so. Are you sure you want to try?" What the teacher said was true. The most important thing after purification was that physical strength will increase as well as mental abilities. This was an obtained ability and cannot be changed by mortal force. Without purification, it would be impossible to solve such difficult questions. They could even damage one's mental ability if they try to force it. Therefore the sensory stone on the table became a necessary stage in the entrance exam. People who couldn't emit light from the stone will be eliminated from the test. This had already become a tradition or common sense. Therefore no previous failures said anything until Chen Chongqing appeared. Chen Chongqing bowed once more and said, "I'm sure." The expression on the teacher's face wasn't good. He thought that Chen Chongqing read the ruling out of luck from somewhere and wanted to waste his and everyone's time. Then he let Chen Chongqing go. Even if his mental ability got damaged from doing so, it would be his own fault. Then go. Chen Chongqing bowed one last time and said no more. He walked out of the bamboo scaffold and continued walking toward the building of Heavenly Academy. Then the teacher said no more and looked at the rest of the students. His expression was frozen and said, "Next." Apparently my translators trolled me and slacked me. Thank Hypersheep for pointing this out. Really sorry guys. He translated the other half after here, which I will link to. Really sorry. http://pastebin.com/ka4k4z7k. Chapter 7, The First Encounter Between Chen and Tang. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After the incense burnt out, a gong was hit to inform the students that this round of testing was finished. Chen Chongqing walked out of the testing building with the rest of the students and didn't care about the people who gave him weird looks. He followed the instructions and walked to the back of the lake where the results were given. He waited patiently for dusk and the final testing result. Many others stayed in the building and checked answers with each other. They talked to each other about their opinions of the test. After Chen Chongqing arrived at the lake, the rocky plain was still very quiet. Only the blue-shirt youngster from before stood there. Chen Chongqing thought that geniuses were always proud and lonely. As a result he didn't walk up to him. However, out of his expectations, the youngster walked towards him. "My name is Tang 30.6, the blue-shirt youngster said. Chen Chongqing was surprised. He didn't expect that the youngster would take the initiative to speak to him. He organized his attire and answered politely, "My last name is Chen Chongqing." Tang 30.6 was startled for a second. He didn't expect that the youngster's name would be so unsophisticated. Even rich people from the rural areas wouldn't give such a name to their son. After a moment of silence he said, "Your name is simple. I couldn't say it's bad." Again, Chen is the family name and Chongqing means to live long, so his name in the US would just be Chongqing. Well, people call out to him. Chen Chongqing thought that Tang 36 spoke quite boldly, but his name was also weird. "My name is Chen Chongqing. Because I was very sick when I was young and my master wanted me to live to be 100 years old. What about you? Why are you named Tang 36? Is it because you are the 36th child in your family? Why do you have so many family members? Where are you from? Wouldn't it be noisy to have so many siblings when you are studying?" Tang 36 was stunned. Asking the meaning and origin of one's name in front of the person wasn't something polite. In addition, Tang 36 had a serious face that wasn't exactly friendly to strangers. The people who didn't know the meaning of his name wouldn't dare to ask in front of him no matter how curious they were. But he didn't expect that this youngster would just ask the question so casually. But what Chen Chongqing thought was very simple. Since he's living in a city where he doesn't know anyone, he should give back friendliness to the genius who was willing to talk to him. At least he should actively chat with him and talk about something. Chen Chongqing had lived with his master and senior brother since he was young. Master didn't speak much and senior didn't speak. Because of the environment he grew up in, he had no idea how to chat regularly. Even when he did so with good intentions, it was easy to create misunderstanding, just like what happened at the Divine General's estate yesterday. No common sense. But the interesting thing is that Tang 36 wasn't offended or angered by it. Rather, he thought Chen Chongqing as very honest and real. Tang 36 had always wanted to be a real person his whole life, but people he encountered are always lying and fake. The sudden encounter of Chen Chongsheng was rather satisfying. I have a lot of relatives from the same generation in my clan, but when we always study at our own respective homes. Because of this it isn't noisy at all. My name is Tang 36, not because I'm the 36th child in my family, but because when I entered the proclamation of Azure Clouds for the first time last year when I was 15 years old, I was the 36th on the list. I was embarrassed by my placement. Especially when I am compared to that woman and that wolf. To remind myself of my weakness I changed my name to Tang 36. Yep, I think I answered all the questions. This conversation was the first Chen Chongsheng has had since leaving Xining village and arriving at the capital. The conversation was also the first for Tang 36 after he left Wen Shui and arrived at the capital. At that instant Chen Chongsheng was 14 years old while Tang 36 was going to be 16 years old. They were inexperienced in many fields and their conversational skills were lacking as well. But the funny thing is that this conversation will prove to be one of the most important conversations that will occur in history. Or it could said that it was the most successful and important chat after the vow taken by Emperor Taizong and the Demon Lord. How many questions did you answer on the test? Tang 36 asked. He was interested because he felt that Chen Chongsheng was an ordinary person but he felt that he was special at the same time. When he saw Chen Chongsheng's pale face, he realized that his question was inappropriate. Even a genius like himself struggled in the sea of test questions. It was clear that Chen Chongsheng had used all of his mental strength. Speaking from this situation then, Chen Chongsheng's result shouldn't be good. I couldn't answer some questions in the field of cultivation like divine sense, true essence, and other things. Chen Chongsheng answered honestly and felt lucky. From a young age he has been reading the scriptures of the way, so the seemingly difficult concept and detailed questions were rather easy to him. But because he didn't cultivate, he didn't know how to answer those questions. Good thing that this was an entrance exam because the questions tested on cultivation wasn't the main focus. Tang 36 felt strange. The only questions he couldn't answer are the cultivation-related ones. Is he saying that he answered all of the other questions? At that instant he noticed that at the other side of the lake a teacher was holding a big stack of testing papers and ran quickly toward a building. The teacher seemed to be excited that he even almost tripped himself when going up the stairs. Tang 36 was stunned for a moment and thought back to Chen Chongsheng's answer. Is he really going to give everyone a big surprise? You answered all of the rest. I cannot speak too confidently. There are two versions of the chanting of ultimate calmness. When the orthodoxy was established, a new version was created and everyone used the newer version. However, the question asked for the time before the year of 1573, and I wasn't sure which version to use. At last I answered with both versions. I hope the teacher won't disapprove of it and deduct points off of my answer. After Tang 36 heard Chen Chongsheng's response he was shocked. He remained silent for a while. For that question he only knew one version and only answered with one version. After a while, he looked at Chen Chongsheng and said, I always thought that a certain someone and I are the most arrogant in the younger generation, but I didn't expect that you are more arrogant than us. Chen Chongsheng was confused. How was he arrogant? The result was finally out. And Chen Chongsheng's name wasn't on it. Chen Chongsheng stood under the list and was silent for a long time. The crowd looked at him without mercy and showed a mocking attitude. If Tang 36 didn't stand beside him, a lot of insults would have been used by now. I don't understand. Chen Chongsheng said. Tang 36 didn't understood either. He believed Chen Chongsheng's statement of answering the questions. If he said he answered most of the questions, then he did answer most of the questions. Just from the score, even if he wasn't on top of the list, he should have made it on the list. Chen Chongsheng found the teacher who was responsible for the stage of sensory stone and said, I want to check my paper. The teacher was organizing his stuff and didn't look at Chongsheng's calm and steady eyes, before you used legal ruling to obtain the permission for the entrance exam, but you should know that the testing papers of Heavenly Academy are not allowed to be rechecked. This represents respect to the Academy. If you didn't enter, then you didn't enter. Chen Changsheng looked at him in silence for a long time before he turned around and left. Although he didn't say anything, I know what he wanted to say. A youngster who is angry but speaks nothing of it is truly significant. Tang 36 watched as the youngster's shadow disappeared at the other side of the lake. He turned around and mocked at someone. Heavenly Academy dares not to accept such a genius. No wonder why it's famous and well respected. You are only older than him by 2 years. It's funny that you are calling him a youngster. The vice principal of Heavenly Academy said, but the more interesting part is, how do you know what he wanted to say? He wanted to say, you will regret this. The reason that I know this is because if I was treated like him, I will definitely mark my words. Heavenly Academy will regret its decision to reject a normal student. He is not a normal student. He is a genius like me. The vice principal of Heavenly Academy fell silent and said, I saw the testing paper of that youngster. Although he didn't reach the purification stage yet, he is already very knowledgeable. For sure he is a genius. He probably isn't even far off from Wang Jisoo. If it was under normal circumstances, would have definitely accepted him into the school and taught him myself. Except, not this time. Tang 36 looked at him and asked, why not? Because someone said so. The vice principal answered. Who? The Divine General's estate, TL. F********* ing son of a. But it pisses me off at least. The continent's strength pyramid consisted of the lone Du Fu, single man, 5 saints, 8 storms of the cardinal directions, and countless characters on the proclamation of liberation. Not mentioning the demon lords, the 38 divine generals were obviously also powerful. But why would a place like Heavenly Academy follow orders from a divine general's estate? Your father asked me to take care of you, so I won't hide this from you, but you can't leak anything out. Just a divine general's estate wouldn't affect Heavenly Academy, but that divine general's estate is different. It's the divine general of the Eastern Decrees estate and the owner is named Su Shiji. Su Shiji. Although he has the favor of the divine empress and is powerful himself, he is still just a divine general. But he has a phoenix in his house. Tang 36's coldness and pride on his face melted when he heard the word phoenix. He was silent for a long time and mumbled, how did Chen Changsheng cause trouble with that phoenix? Who is he? The vice principal said calmly, we couldn't guess who he is. All things aside, he is already 14 years old. Even if he start to cultivate now, there are too many geniuses in this world. Even if he has good talent, what is he going to do? I compared him to Wang Jisoo previously, but if he really has Wang Jisoo's perseverance and luck, then does it really matter if he got accepted into Heavenly Academy or not? All he needs to do is to work hard and he can be the best. Chen Changsheng didn't know that he got rejected because of the divine general's estate. He thought he was kicked off the list because the son of a rich family in the capital wanted his spot. Although he had just entered the regular world, he read about many shady business in the literatures. What else can he do besides keeping silent right now? As he left Heavenly Academy and walked towards the second school, he still didn't notice that a carriage was following him from afar. On that carriage was an emblem of blood phoenix faintly expressed its unquestionable presence. Chapter 8, Star Taker. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Nowadays, the mainstream methods of cultivation were the canonical methods of the orthodoxy. The main source of true essence was the stars in the sky, the radiant faith focused upon the word. Radiant. What lit up the night was actually starlight. Break through the meditation realm and enter the ethereal opening realm, then advance into the star fusion realm, which was to use the energy released from tens of thousands stars onto the world. The final goal of cultivation is to evolve the mortal's body and mentality. From this, we can see the importance of stars in the world of cultivation. Every country and sect has star observation platforms. However, they rarely named the platforms seizing stars or stealing stars, because this would sound disrespectful towards the stars. However, the second school on Chen Chongsheng's roster, surprisingly, was called Star Taker Academy. Star Taker Academy. This school used such an aggressive name, but the orthodoxy had no disagreement. The school was originally very aggressive. In the entire world, only this school had dared to use and deserved to use this name. Because this school was directly affiliated to the Zhou military, in countless years it had nurtured many brave and determined youngsters and many generals as stars. During the war against the demons, Star Taker Academy joined the war when the humans were in a hopeless state in the war. The whole school faculty and students all joined the war effort to fight back the demons. 9 out of 10 participants of the school died at the end of the war. After the war, the large school was like a graveyard due to the large number of casualties. For this reason, Star Taker Academy earned great respect in the human world, and it also gained unimaginable momentum. Who would disagree to have such schools who sacrificed so much, not just Star Taker Academy, to want to use such names? Everyone in the world understood Star Taker Academy's bloody yet honorable history, including Chen Chongsheng. Chen Chongsheng's master placed Star Taker Academy second on the roster, but in his heart, Star Taker Academy should be ranked first. Although Chen Chongsheng felt a bit upset for not getting into Heavenly Academy, he wasn't affected much mentally. He believed that Star Taker Academy definitely wouldn't act like Heavenly Academy, at least not to a large extent. As he thought, he arrived at the solemn and dignified Star Taker Academy, which had began to prepare for the second exam. As expected, Star Taker Academy was different from Heavenly Academy. Even though outside the school there was also a huge crowd, the field was completely silent without any sound. It might have been because of the fully armed soldiers' eagle-like eyes or the big stone tablet that was filled with the names of generals who died for the nation. After filling the simple sign-up sheet and obtaining their number, around 600 young adults followed the military officer's lead. Similar to the exam at Heavenly Academy, Star Taker Academy also prepared a pre-exam. The aim was to eliminate students that haven't purified and lessen the pressure for the officials on administering the test. The stone plate was huge, just like a millstone. As a matter of fact, it was the millstone from Star Taker Academy's kitchen. It weighed 300 pounds. Only students who are able to lift this plate and walk up 30 steps on a flight of stairs are qualified for the official entrance exam. 300 pounds of weight, unless they have reached the purification stage and enhanced their muscle and bone, regular people are usually unable to complete the task. In addition, they needed to walk up such a long staircase. Many young students who had yet to reach purification looked at the stone plate and their expressions changed. Many of them shook their heads and left the field. Even some students who had reached purification but hadn't completely adjusted to their strength, forfeited the task reluctantly. Of course, some ordinary youngsters bravely tested the strength of their body, but not a single one of them succeeded. Actually, it wasn't too hard to see people pick up the stone plate before reaching purification in the entrance exam of Star Taker Academy. For example, the current White Tiger General was born with enormous strength. During his exam to attempt to enter the academy, he hadn't reached the purification stage yet, but he easily picked up the stone plate and threw it across the lake. But it wasn't something that happens daily. The instructor was a little disappointed. He checked for the time and decided to speed up the process. He ordered the students to report their stage of cultivation and let the people who had reached purification test first, then let the ordinary students try. Sadly, even until noon, not a single ordinary student had created a miracle. Just when people got bored of the failures and wanted to leave, a well-built young student entered the stage and easily picked up the stone plate. In just a few seconds, he flew up the 30 steps and wasn't even out of breath. To show his strength, he then carried the stone plate back to its original location. The crowd was stunned. The youngster raised his hand and waved to the people. He once again proudly walked up the stone stairs and headed for the inner part of Star Taker Academy. The interesting thing was, he had an honest face. No matter how much he tried to act proud and arrogant, in the eyes of the crowd it was just a silly act. There was no mockery but only friendly laughter. After the well-built youngster left, many people started to guess his origin and background. Suddenly someone mentioned that he saw a faint blue mark around his ankle. With this information the crowd stopped chatting. The reason was that the youngster probably inherited the bloodline of the Yao race, or he could be actually from the Western Yao domain. For hundreds of years now, humans and Yaos had become allies and fought against the demon race. Due to the alliance, although the relationship between them wasn't exactly friendly, it was natural. Some nobles of the Yao race who could transform into human form even lived in the human world. Surely there are some of them living in the capital right now, except, the way and culture of humans and Yao was very different. In the human world, no one really talked about this, but it was fine as long as the Yao race behaved. After the Yao youngster successfully lifted the stone plate, another two young students who were formerly hunters on Mount Min, also used their natural body strength and picked up the stone plate and moved it up the stairs. Although they were struggling, people still cheered for their achievements. The military instructor who was sitting above the stairs nodded his head lightly. He seemed to be pleased by this year's result. Time went on and it was finally Chen Chongqing's turn. The gathering crowd observed this young student and sympathetically cheered a bit for him and stopped. This student was seemingly young and his body had yet to develop. Let's not compare him to the Yao student. Chen Chongqing wasn't even as well built as the two young hunters. It seemed impossible for him to lift the heavy stone plate. At Heavenly Academy, Chen Chongqing used his familiarity with the laws to skip the stage of the sensory stone. Right now in Star Taker Academy's exam, he might be able to think of some other way, but perhaps he was affected by the heated and serious theme of the surroundings, or perhaps he wanted to just try the challenge. Either way, he didn't do anything out of place and followed the rules. I gotta say, he YOLO'd like a boss. He walked to the stone plate and slowly squatted down. His hand steadily held the two sides of the plate and took 5 deep breaths. He concentrated all his might into his waist, legs, and arms. As he groaned deeply, he released his power. The crowd in front of the stairs suddenly became silent. The people who were chatting forgot to continue out of shock. Their jaws dropped as they looked towards the testing field. The stone plate slowly elevated and at last, Chen Chongqing picked it up to the height of his chest. Not an inch more or less, exactly at the required height. His face was a little red, but his expression was still calm and there was not a trace of nervous or panic in his eyes. The field was filled with compliments and claps. Everyone continuously cheered the youngster on. Using rhythm shouts, they wanted to help him lift his feet. Chen Chongqing walked forward 1 step. Just a single step and his knees shook a bit. It was one matter to lift the plate, but moving the heavy plate and walking up the stairs was another matter. His breathing patterns became disorderly and his face got redder and redder. He didn't make any sound, but from his bumped cheeks it's clear that he was biting his jaw and struggling. He took 1 step after another up the stone stairs, slowly walking up. It was certain that Chen Chongqing hadn't reached the purification stage yet. The strength of his muscle and bones should only be that of an average teenager. Furthermore, since he was constantly ill when he was a child, he should have been weaker than a normal teenager. But because he was sick and it was a sickness that hard to treat, the people in the broken temple outside of Xining village cared deeply for Chen Chongqing's body. When he began to memorize the 3,000 scriptures of the way when he was young, Chen Chongqing's master found countless herbs to make medical soup out of them and allowed Chen Chongqing to bathe in them. Senior Yuren used wood sticks and thorns to help enhance his endurance by beating him. For more than a decade, the people he was most familiar with were the 3 people in the temple. The most familiar taste for him was the taste of book, medicine, and sticks. His sickness wasn't cured by the consumption of medicine and beatings, and it was impossible for him to obtain the enormous strength of the Yao youngster. But the supposedly weak body of his was now stronger than an average man. Although it's just healthy in power on the surface, Chen Changsheng was still very happy about it. A youngster who was sick when he was a child and surrounded by the dark shadow of his illness cared deeply about his body and the details of it more than anyone else. Therefore today at Star Taker Academy, he silently walked toward the stone plate and only wanted to use his strength to pass his exam. He wanted to lift that heavy stone plate to prove himself, and also to thank his master and senior. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, 4 steps. Chen Changsheng breathed harder and harder. His face got darker and darker as he advanced. His tied-up black hair was full of sweat, but his eyes were still calm and steady. The cheering and shouting from the crowd had already stopped. Everyone looked at the struggling youngster walk up the stairs. They were worried about the youngster and felt respect for him at the same time. There were a few times that the youngster was about to fall, but he held his place with a mysterious strength in his body. The instructor, at the end of the stone stairs, looked at Chen Changsheng with nothing but admiration and praise in his eyes. 7 steps, 8 steps, 9 steps. Chen Changsheng's steps got slower and slower. The praise in the instructor's eyes grew stronger and stronger. He was surprised by the performance of this youngster, as a soldier. What he cared about the most was Chen Changsheng's perseverance and bravery. He has already decided that even if Chen Changsheng didn't move the stone plate up the stairs, he would still let him pass the first exam. As for the problem of the honor and reputation of the academy and Zhou military, the instructor looked at the nervous crowd and felt relieved. It seemed that most of the participants would side with him. Children who were trying earnestly should be praised and respected. Thinking about this, the instructor's mind went blank. He didn't look at the stairs for a while until his mind came back. When it did, he noticed the change in the crowd's expression. He turned around and there was another person standing beside him. It was the youngster who was tired and covered in sweat. The instructor was relieved. He extended his arm and patted the youngster's shoulder. Chen Changsheng had walked to the top of the stairs. The heavy plate was on the floor next to him. He succeeded. Chapter 9, Did I Do Anything Wrong? You are listening at novelfull.audio. This time Chen Changsheng successfully entered the official entrance exam of Star Taker Academy. Except this time, it wasn't cold and mocking eyes that welcomed him like at Heavenly Academy but rather, hopeful and caring smiles from the students and the teachers from Star Taker Academy. He felt warm and happy with the first encounter and was determined to be accepted. Different schools in the capital desire different things from their students. Heavenly Academy relies heavily on classical teaching and talent on cultivation. Compared to them, Star Taker Academy cared less about cultivation. The Zhou military always believed that cultivation is something to worry about after entering the schools. What the military actually care about was the students' manner and discipline. Therefore the number of testing questions was less than that of heavenly academies. On the other hand, Star Taker Academy had a strict requirement on the testing format and penmanship. In addition, the context of the questions was mostly about creating simulations and strategy on the battlefield. If Chen Changsheng had any talent, his most valuable talent was the thousands of books and literature he memorized from cover to cover. Just like the test for Heavenly Academy, after opening the exam, the first question he saw looked familiar. The 3,000 ways include tens of thousands images. This sentence contained no error. It covered countless teachings, of course it included the military strategies and famous battles in history. It especially detailedly described the war between humans and demons. He remembered those, obviously he wouldn't answer them wrong. Smoothly, Chen Changsheng finished the exam and left with the other students to the building of rules. They waited for the final result to come out. Standing by the legendary beast who represented the solemn Zhou military ruling, he recalled what was on the test. After ascertaining that there should be no problem for him getting into the Star Taker Academy, he relaxed a bit. Then at the corner he saw that Yao race youngster who now looked somewhat sad. Chen Chongqing friendly stood on tiptoe and tapped his shoulder to show comfort. Obviously, this Yao youngster didn't know much about humans' military strategies, therefore he couldn't have done too well. The sun was about to fall and red beams of light was shining down upon the iron fence that stood on the building of rulings. The scene created a mysterious feeling to the surrounding and the crowd. Chen Chongqing stood under the light and looked at the empty wall. His immature face was filled with happiness and expectation for a bright future. Yet he didn't know that later on what would come was still bitter disappointment. Why? The Zhou military officer, who supervised the primary lifting stone exam, and another serious-looking officer stood in front of a desk, questioning. They both looked directly at a mid-aged general. The first military officer's face was strangely red because he could barely suppress his anger. That mid-aged general was expressionless. His eyebrows looked like two ink silkworms. He had a serious face, but it was without anger. Listening to his subordinate's angry question, he slightly frowned and said, "Is this your attitude when asking your superior?" The two officers paused after hearing this. One of them pointed to the sun outside and said, "Even though only two of us saw that test paper, there are other company workers who are concerned about that student named Chen Chongqing. My attitude right now is wrong, but if others knew the results, they will ask the same question as well." The mid-aged general replied, "He is only a regular youngster who didn't even successfully purify, why do you take him so seriously?" That officer angrily stepped up and pointed at the test paper that was already crumbled into garbage. He said, "You also saw that test paper. You of all people should understand clearly. In recent decades, among the students that took the entrance exam, there was never such a perfect test paper. From standard questions to battle analysis, there was no mistake at all. Not a single miswritten character or even a slightly thicker stroke. Yes, that kid probably can't become a strong general like you, but he can definitely become one of the best military advisors." The mid-aged general remained silent for a while before he replied. "This is a command from the imperial palace, I don't need to give you any explanation." That officers were shocked after heard the reply. After a while he woke up and said with a slightly deeper voice, "But that I need to give that kid an explanation." The mid-aged general looked up and gave him a look. "Call him over, I will give him an explanation." Chen Chongqing walked into the severe and strict building. Looking at the fire on the desk, Chen Chongqing remained silent. His fists gradually tightened up. His face became slightly pale, not sure if it was because of exhaustion or anger or even both. When he looked at the wall, it didn't have his name on it. He was extremely angry and even angrier than he was yesterday when he encountered supercilious looks and contempts. Because he had great hopes on entering Star Taker Academy, he was happy, but all his hope transformed into disappointment the moment he saw the admittance announcement. All his effort up until now seemed to have become a joke. Why did these events happen? He wanted an explanation. The mid-aged general who sat behind the desk said he would give him an explanation. He knew what it would be. "Sorry." The mid-aged general stood up, like a beast staring at a rabbit. The look he gave Chen Chongqing was cold, but the word he spoke was the word sorry. "As a Zhou soldier, I have to violate my own principle, so sorry. My action will affect Star Taker Academy's reputation, so sorry. You have talent and a bright future. You are only a kid, but I have to temporarily hinder your future, sorry. I can't tell you why, sorry. But I think you will know the reason quickly. So, I wish you can give me a chance to correct myself." After Chen Chongqing finished hearing the apologies, he remained silent for a while. Then he turned and left. At 5 o'clock in the morning on the second day, Chen Chongqing woke up punctually, like yesterday and every day for the past 14 years. He cleaned up and dressed up. He calmed down and obtained a clear mind before he left the inn and continued his intended school path. According to the roster's order, he went to the next two schools. What he encountered at Heavenly Academy and Star Taker Academy obviously made him upset and unhappy, but he was the one who treasures time the most in the world. He didn't want to waste time on useless anger and regret. He only wanted to use time for valuable reasons. Such behavior sometimes gave people an impression of extreme determination. The experiences yesterday didn't seem to influence him at all. He prepared seriously and carefully took the tests. He used the knowledge in his brain and determined spirit. He successfully passed the 2 schools' entrance exams. Based on the content of the test, he felt that he should be able to pass successfully, but he didn't make it. It didn't seem to surprise him anymore. With the experiences from the previous 2 schools, Chen Changsheng did not feel that disappointed anymore. In another word, he already felt numb. He understood clearly, there were people interfering behind his back. Who were those people? This answer was also very clear. At evening, he walked out of the 4th school and finally saw that carriage from the Divine General's estate for the first time. He saw the dark but clear blood phoenix emblem on the wheel. The owner of the carriage stopped it in front of the school intentionally to let him see it. Chen Changsheng saw the carriage and understand that the answer was about to come. Even though he had already guessed the answer, the feeling of directly obtaining the answer was somewhat different. A mid-aged woman walked down the wagon. You are only a child. You don't deserve to let the Divine General's estate do these things to you. The mid-aged woman walked up to him and said expressionlessly. Yet we still did these things because we worried that you were too young to have a clear understanding of the situation. As a result, we seriously demonstrated the strength of the clan to let you see for yourself. Now you should understand clearly. As long as we disagree, you will have no future in Zhou. Chen Changsheng remembered her from the Divine General's estate. She was the first person he saw. He gave a gesture of greeting and stood straight without saying a word. The mid-aged woman felt surprised. She didn't expect that Chen Changsheng could still have such calmness. So calm that he didn't even forget to give her a greeting. His actions would truly make people feel dumbfounded and even uneasy. You should clearly know what we want. If you agree, then what we took from you will be returned to you. Heavenly Academy, Star Taker Academy, Temple Seminary. You can choose where you want to attend. You can choose which teacher you want to follow. You can choose to join the military or enter the orthodoxy or become an official in the government. All of these things you can get and choose. The mid-aged woman looked at him and said seriously, but if you disagree, the experiences you had in the last 2 days will become scenes repeated over and over again in your life. Chen Changsheng still remained silent and did not speak a word. The mid-aged woman continued, you are a smart man, you should know clearly how to choose. Chen Changsheng looked at her and finally spoke his first sentence. Senior had written in his notes, a smart person will live unhappily, so people should live pretending to be unaware. The mid-aged woman smiled and replied. Yet you are truly clever. You didn't tell the engagement to anyone. Otherwise you would be dead already. Chen Changsheng finally confirmed that in the past 2 days, the Divine General of the Eastern Decrees estate had always kept an eye on him. The mid-aged woman said, of course, don't misunderstand that what I said previously was only a possibility. Under the eyes of the Divine Empress, the Divine General's estate will always follow the laws. It has never bullied anyone and will only help people. We only need you to give up something. What you were originally prepared to give up before. We can then help you to gain much more. What he had originally prepared to give up was obviously the engagement. Help you to gain much more. All these things were what he could obtain by himself. Chen Changsheng suddenly felt, in comparison to the prosperous capital, like he was behind the old temple. The mountain and forest that was filled with beasts was so safe and pretty. He looked at that mid-aged woman and suddenly said, Nanny, did I do anything wrong? The mid-aged woman was shocked. She did not know how to reply. She had lived in the capital for more than 100 years. She had watched her lady marry into Su Mansion. She watched her lady's husband fight for a better future countless times. She was used to government high officials and strong cultivators cheating on each other. But never had she ever heard such words. It was a seemingly immature question, but it was hard to answer. So she couldn't and didn't answer.